Have you ever noticed that sometimes the pain doesn't come from what ended, but from what keeps going long after it should have stopped? If you are watching this video now, pause for a moment. Lower the pace. If you can, use headphones. Not because this is loud, but because it is subtle. What you are about to hear is not meant to convince you of anything. It is meant to help you observe, to notice thoughts you usually rush past, sensations you learned to ignore. This reflection is about maturity in relationships, about recognizing when cycles end, and about listening to what has already been quietly speaking inside you. Stay present. By the end of this, you may not have all the answers, but you might see more clearly why some endings are not losses. They are conclusions. There comes a moment in life when the pain no longer comes from what happened. It comes from what insists on continuing even when it has already ended. Relationships do not end only when people separate. They end when the truth becomes clear, and even then, we choose to ignore it. Maturity begins exactly there. The moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and begin to observe, "What is this trying to show me?" Life teaches something simple and uncomfortable. We do not control people, their feelings, or the cycles of life. We control only the way we choose to respond. And perhaps the greatest emotional mistake is not loving too much, but resisting the end of something that has already fulfilled its purpose. Many relationships do not end because of a lack of love, but because of an excess of attachment to an old version of things. Memory becomes a shelter, and the present a place we avoid looking at. When you observe your mind with clarity, you realize it is not the person you miss, it is the feeling that existed when you believed everything was secure. The mind creates stories to avoid emptiness. It repeats scenes, dialogues, possibilities, as if thinking more could change what has already revealed itself. But thinking is not the same as perceiving. Perceiving is silence. It is presence. It is the space where you see a cycle ending without trying to fix it. Emotional maturity emerges when you understand that insisting is not loyalty, it is fear. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear of discovering who you are without that bond. A mature mind does not run from pain. It observes it without dramatizing. It understands that everything that is born also transforms. And when something transforms, fighting it is not strength, it is useless resistance. There comes a point when continuing to try no longer is love. It is simply the ego trying to prove it did not fail. But relationships are not tests, they are experiences. And some experiences were not meant to last, they were meant to expand you. When you begin to observe your thoughts instead of getting lost in them, something changes. You realize the pain diminishes not because the other returned, but because you returned to yourself. Mental clarity is not forgetting. It is remembering without suffering. It is looking at the past and saying, "That was real, but it is no longer." Maturity does not demand immediate answers. It asks for silent honesty. Ask yourself, does this cycle still nourish me, or does it only keep me familiar with pain? Letting go is not abandoning, it is accepting, and acceptance is a profound act of awareness. When you stop trying to control the outcome, the mind relaxes, the body understands, and the heart stops fighting time. Everything that needs to go, goes, and everything that remains, remains by choice, not by fear. True strength is not in holding on, it is in recognizing the exact moment to open your hand. And when you do, there is no emptiness, there is space. Space for a new state of awareness. Space for relationships that walk with you, not against you. Space to be whole, without needing to prove yourself to anyone. There is a phase when the mind begins to negotiate with reality. It says, maybe it's just a phase, maybe tomorrow will be different, maybe I'm exaggerating. These thoughts are not hope, they are delays of grief. Maturity brings no optimism, it brings lucidity. When you stop justifying behaviors that diminish you, something reorganizes inside, not with anger, with clarity. A mature perspective understands that suffering comes not from the event, but from the interpretation. and misinterpreting a closed cycle is remaining trapped within it. There is a kind of pain that matures you, and there is a kind of pain that simply repeats. The difference lies in the willingness to see without distortion. Mature relationships do not demand constant vigilance. They do not ask for daily proof. They do not keep you in a state of emotional alert. When loving becomes continuous exhaustion, the body understands before the mind. The tension in the shoulders, the knot in the stomach, the racing thoughts before sleep. None of this is accidental. The body is honest where the mind is still negotiating. Awareness begins when you stop asking, "What can I do to make this work?" and begin asking, "What is this doing to me?" That question changes everything, because it is not trying to save the bond, it is trying to preserve integrity. Some cycles end not because of conflict, but because of misalignment. Worldviews change, rhythms change, priorities change. And insisting on walking side by side when the steps no longer move in the same direction creates friction, not connection. The conditioned mind tries to turn attachment into purpose. It calls fight what is actually fear of impermanence. But everything is impermanent, including the versions of ourselves. You are no longer who you were when this relationship began, and neither is the other. Mental clarity arises when you accept that it is not possible to sustain old bonds with a new level of consciousness. Something always breaks in that effort. A mature outlook does not harden the heart. It teaches you not to confuse yourself with what passes. And when you observe your thoughts without identifying with them, you notice something subtle. Suffering does not come from loss. It comes from trying to keep alive an image that no longer exists. Maturity does not shout. It does not make speeches. It is silent. It understands that not everything needs verbal closure. Some cycles end simply through inner understanding. When you stop reacting emotionally to every memory, you begin to recover energy. And that energy does not return to the other. It returns to you. At that point, awareness expands. You realize you did not lose time. You gained perception. Everything that revealed limits taught you where the other ends and where your responsibility to yourself begins. Relationships are not promises of permanence. They are temporary meetings of consciousness. And when a meeting fulfills its function, gratitude is more mature than insistence. Letting go does not require coldness. It requires presence. Presence to feel sadness without turning it into identity. Presence to accept emptiness without rushing to fill it. Presence to trust that clarity comes before new beginnings. When you no longer cling to how things should have been, the mind rests, and in that rest, something new organizes itself. It is not another relationship that arrives first, it is a new relationship to yourself. And when that happens, you no longer enter cycles out of lack, you enter by choice. Maturity eliminates pain. It eliminates unconscious repetition, and that alone is already a dignified ending. There is a moment when the intuition has already said what it needed to say. It does not shout, it does not argue. It simply repeats in silence the same sensation. You feel it before you understand it. You feel it in the body, in the discomfort that appears without a clear reason, in the peace that does not return even when everything seems fine. Ignoring this is not a lack of sensitivity, it is attachment to the idea of control. Maturity begins when you trust perception more than hope, when you understand that clarity is not the absence of emotion, but enough presence not to deceive yourself. Ending cycles is not giving up on people, it is giving up the fight against what has already shown itself. There is a wisdom in accepting the timing of things, in recognizing that forcing permanence creates wear, and that everything that must be sustained through constant effort is already out of balance. Those who mature learn not to beg for reciprocity. They learn not to trade values for presence. They learn that inner peace is not a reward, it is a criterion. Life does not demand that you carry what weighs you. It only observes how long you insist on doing so. When you accept that some relationships belong to the past, not because of failure, but because of completion, something aligns within you. You begin to act less from reaction, and more from coherence. This kind of maturity creates space for truer relationships, not based on lack, not sustained by fear, not fueled by expectation. True relationships do not ask you to shrink to fit. They do not confuse intensity with depth. They do not require emotional surveillance. They flow because there is respect for rhythm, for silence, and for the other's freedom to be who they are. Paying attention to this is an act of responsibility towards yourself, because every time you ignore your clearest perception, you move away from yourself to remain in something that no longer walks with you.
That sometimes leaving in silence is the most honest way to remain whole. Life follows its own course, and fighting it only creates unnecessary wear. When you learn to accept what does not depend on you and care for what does, cycles end with less pain and more understanding. You do not become cold, you become lucid. And lucidity does not close the heart, it simply protects it from getting lost on paths that have already ended. In the end, maturing is this: listening to what is already clear, acting with dignity, and allowing life to keep moving. Because true relationships begin exactly there, when you do not abandon yourself to keep something alive, and you pay attention. If something shifted while you listened, even slightly, that is not coincidence. Understanding the end of a cycle does not arrive as certainty. It arrives as calm. You may realize that what felt confusing before now feels clearer, quieter, more honest. Ending cycles with maturity is not about cutting people off. It is about stopping the abandonment of yourself. When clarity replaces resistance, endings stop feeling like failures and begin to feel like alignment. If this reflection helped you see your relationships, your past, or your present with a little more awareness, then it has already done its work. Carry that attention with you, because the more you listen, the less you will need to suffer to understand. And when the next cycle ends, you will recognize it sooner and let it go with dignity.